I'd like to say good night to all Vincentians. Those, I didn't think I was particularly tall, but good night to all Vincentians, those who are gathered here and those who would listen through television and otherwise. It's really a delight to be in so distinguished a company and for me to follow in the footsteps of these giants who have gone before, who have an outstanding record of public, even political service in St. Vincent. And if I were able to achieve even a few of the things that they have, I think that I would have an interesting record of my own. Now, one of the things, to refer to those earlier presentations that was said, Jomo Thomas described those people inclined to vote in favor of the Constitution as yes men and yes women. Now, I don't know if that is if that is flattery to any degree, but there was a time when you wouldn't consider calling an individual a yes man or a yes woman at all. So it seems as if in the course of the constitutional debate, there has been some transformation of the way we think to a degree. Now, and I think that a useful framework to a serious degree has been provided in the previous presentations. One of the things that Mr. Thomas did was refer to an article by the Chief Justice of Trinidad. And the Chief Justice was saying then that if you have to consult any individual as a constitutional provision, then it's safe to suggest that that individual could be ignored. And that actually touches some of the provisions in our Constitution now. And the way in which the Chief Justice meant it to be taken is such that, when a Prime Minister has to consult the leader of the opposition, for example, in the appointment of an Attorney General, what the leader of the opposition says is of little significance, and the Prime Minister could go about and impose a Governor General, so to speak, and in the context of our document, we understand that the Prime Minister could also remove the Governor General as he sees fit. So, given that statement by the Chief Justice quoted by Mr. Thomas, we would probably then appreciate that the way in which our Governor General is going to be appointed in the new Constitution, or rather the President in that new context, and the way in which individuals are going to be appointed to head many of the commissions which are established in the document represents an improvement over things as they currently stand. One of the things that I took from Mr. Rose is that we might even start off this discussion by questioning the legitimacy of the current contract that we have, a contract which more or less was imposed on Vincentians by the British. I find it interesting when we consider that we have to go to Parliament and get a two-thirds majority, and then go in a referendum and get a two-thirds majority from Vincentians voting there to change the Constitution. And this is a very Constitution which was just given to us without any regard for the public opinion at the time. Not even a 50% vote. So I'm not sure, and I use that to say this, that the British entirely had our best interests at heart when they were developing the document that they want to give us. And we could draw on the experience of our Commonwealth brothers and sisters to further substantiate this point. Many of us are familiar with the crisis in Zimbabwe at the time. And the truth is that we could tie that crisis to the constitutional provisions that were given to Zimbabwe at the time of their independence by the British. Now, we have to understand that that revolution, which was fought by noble freedom fighters, was fought on the basis of giving back land to the people of Africa. And one of the arrangements that came out in the Constitution that was handed to Zimbabwe is such that it prohibits, giving the Zimbabwean access to the very land that the revolution was fought for. So it means that 30 years almost into independence, those Zimbabwe citizens who are trying to actually finish the revolution that they started so many years ago are being frustrated, and it led to a deterioration of society in Zimbabwe. Now, with that kind of example, I think it's important for Vincentians to understand the importance. It's important for Vincentians to understand that we aren't going to allow, or we shouldn't think about allowing the debate surrounding the Constitution to descend to a place that would bring joy to the British heart. And therefore, we need to respect divergent views as they might emerge in the context of the discussion. And we have to really purpose ourselves to go and get something done that was believed to be impossible. When you think of some of the provisions, you understand that stability really wasn't a foremost consideration by those who gave us the document. We mentioned the two-thirds majority which is required at both Parliament and at a referendum for changing the Constitution. And notwithstanding that, we could have a situation where the government is formed by a minority of the popular vote, as we had in 1998. These things are inconsistent. And that is the legacy that the British left us. And that is the very thing that we are trying to change now. So I really appeal for unity in Vincentian society at this time as we go about the process of constitutional change. Now, I think, because I have prepared some remarks for the presentation this evening, that the need for constitutional reform is something that is clearly established without question. And we have seen political leaders who have declared at one time or another their support for constitutional reform, notwithstanding the way in which they have deviated in some instances from that commitment. And who are we to say, really, that there are no grounds for meaningful deviation and that there is no concern that merits further attention? But who are we also to derail a process that has occupied Vincentians in serious effort for 6 years without trying to come to the table and come to the very thing that Jomo Thomas highlighted as being important for the business of constitutional reform, compromise? I think that over the few days remaining, those of us who are gathered here, we have obviously demonstrated an interest in the constitutional discussion. And there is a general national interest as well. Over the few days which are remaining, I think it's important for us to be committed to a deep study of the provisions, because it's only through that deep study and meditation that we'd be able to speak to issues related to constitutional reform with any real authority. Now, there are several ways in which I have conceptualized this whole business of constitutional reform, and I've articulated them from time to time in different forums. And what I think is a useful paradigm in which to think is that, we are considered to be the equivalent of the illegitimate child in this Caribbean. And the Constitution has a provision which asserts the legitimacy of every child, which is an important, I think, inclusion based on our own Caribbean experience, because we are now saying that we are going to develop the Constitution based on the way we think about ourselves and not the way that the European powers think about us. And I say that we are illegitimate because we are really, it could be said, the product of rape, the rape of the Caribbean islands by the European powers. And we have been created. In fact, this is the very thing to which the scholars point. If you look through the literature, one very distinguished scholar on Caribbean affairs says that we are civilizational mixed bloods, the cultural offsprings of the conquerors and the vanquished. And what I also, so I say this to